Hello everyone, and welcome back to a very short episode of the Crowdfunding Roundup Tuesday edition. These are the editions where I look at everything that launched over the weekend. There are only 2 campaigns that launched over the weekend, and until one of those campaigns launched yesterday on Monday, I was considering just folding this in to the Wednesday edition. But there are actually quite a few campaigns that have launched today while I've been, working, and so I don't think I need to add anything onto that video. So here is a very short video with 2 campaigns, and then I'll talk about the games that I played this week. And because it was my birthday, I played a few games for my birthday. I had a heavy Euro group come over the weekend, so we played a couple games on Sunday. So I have 5 games to talk about in the back half. Then looking forward, tomorrow, in just 1 day's time from today, I'll be launching the big Wednesday edition that covers all of the games, all of the campaigns that launched on Tuesday. And then at the end of the week, I'll be putting out the Friday edition, looking at the launches of Wednesday and Thursday, and looking ahead to the campaigns that'll be completing their funding in the following week. The hand-picked campaigns that I kind of want to bring your attention to. Now, in the interest of not having these videos run too long, I'm going to shorten the amount of time that I talk about most games, the games that have just launched. But I will spend a bit more time in the Friday editions looking at the games that are funding the following week. And if you want to know what that's going to be this week, I'm looking at likely covering Alpujarras and Fisheries of Gloucester, the Street Fighter V board game over on Gamefound, Lore board game, and Wards of Stonefall Chapter 1. And that last one is a roll and write game, a print and play. And I normally don't cover print and plays, but I like to make exceptions occasionally if I feel that a game merits an exception. And this one I do feel merits an exception. So I'll be covering those 4 games in the back half of Friday's video. Now the first of these is called AT3. This is an abstract strategy game designed by Mitsuo Yamamoto. He's an independent designer out of, I believe, Tokyo, and this game is not even on Board Game Geek yet, but he does have a page, a designer page, so if you want to give him a little look, he's over there. Yeah, and he says he's been designing now for 15 years. Now, this latest game, AT3, is called Arithmetic Tic-Tac-Toe, and it's a take on tic-tac-toe. The way that this works, because tic-tac-toe is a simple game, and this is still a simple abstract strategy game, but the way that this works and the way that he's gamified it is so that the games function off of 3 different winning conditions. So unlike tic-tac-toe, you'll never have a tie game. You can see over here in the leftmost one, if someone actually gets tic-tac-toe with their colors, they'll win the game. But if no one actually wins tic-tac-toe, it defaults to the total number of circles on the player's tiles. And if it's still a tie game, then it will default to the number of tiles that each player played with these blue triangles. He also has an alternate for this game, a variant where you can turn the tiles over. The ones with these icons on them are the ones with the half triangles. So you can place your tiles down and not know where your opponent's tiles are. And then at the end of the game, you'll flip all the tiles up and see who won. He also has a second variant using these tokens that are in the second pledge level that makes it into a multiplicative game instead of an arithmetic game. Now, if we go to the top here, which is where I probably should have started, there's a funding goal on this of $700. He's at $2,700, so it's funded, it's clear to go. It's got 15 days left on the campaign. The campaign will end on April the 5th, and he is planning on delivering AT3 in May of 2023. So there's a pretty fast turnaround. He is a ceramics worker, so I believe a lot of this is already physically made. Now, you can pledge the primary edition here for $23, and with shipping in the US, which is about $8, that comes in at a total of $31. Or you can pledge this other edition that has these additional tokens, and that one would pledge for $39 plus, again, $8 shipping, so $47. Again, this is a very simple kind of puzzly two-player tug-of-war game. It's based around tic-tac-toe, and it's by this very talented and very independent Japanese game designer he's got 24 campaigns. So he's been producing a lot of games, but they're all these kind of homespun games. Now, the second campaign is called Tolerance. This one is over on Gamefound. It's being published by Dragon Dawn Productions. And let's take a quick look over at it here. The designer is Timo Multamaki. The artist is Lars Monk. It is a light game as well, and it is a card game with deduction to it. Now, if you go here to the front page, it says, Tolerance is an asymmetric set collection game with variable player goals and a deeply embedded theme. 3 to 5 players engage in the conflict between Protestants and Catholics in 16th century England. Tolerance uses a trick-taking mechanic where the winner of each trick must perform the played card's actions, whether beneficial or not. And you can see that this one has also funded. It's just past its funding goal, but it has 24 days left. It's going to fund on April the 15th, or I should say the campaign's going to complete on April the 15th. And the game is set to deliver on October 2023. Now, there's 3 versions of this game. There's a symmetric mode where you just play for the tricks. And even then, as it's set up top, whoever wins the tricks has to perform this kind of special powers of the cards. So that's what makes this game a little unique. But there's also an asymmetric mode where players will have leadership cards, and that gives them like asymmetric player abilities. And then they have a third mode, an advanced asymmetric mode, where you don't reveal those leader cards to the other players. So they don't know what your powers are, and they won't know that until the game is complete. Now, I'll just kind of scroll down so that you can get a look at this, some of these cards. I mean, this is basically it right here. It's just a rather simple card game. Now, there is the game itself here, which has a price of 23 euros. And shipping to the United States, as you can see, is going to be 10 euros. So that brings the total pledge price here to 33 euros. Which is, 36 US dollars. And then they have some additional pledges, some bundles with other games that they've published before, including White Hat. And then this bigger bundle also includes Darwinning and Mosiac. And I can't really read the last game here. Let's see. The last game is Dwarf. So that basically is all of the games from this publisher. So I'm trying to get you a little bit of a better look at the cards. I guess that's about it, right here in the middle. And also, right there. So, again, both of these games are very simple. One's sort of an abstract strategy game. One's a trick-taking card game. Those were really the two big neither one was big, but those are the two big launches from this weekend. Now, before I wrap the video, I'd like to talk about the games that I've played this week and to give you sort of my preliminary scores on them. Because last Thursday was my birthday, I played a few games with Kristen for my birthday. The first of those was Astro Knights, which is sort of a reskinning of Aeon's End. And I have everything for Aeon's End, and I think I prefer Aeon's End. So we're going to play through, I think, all of the big monsters. It's a space theme, so they're kind of intergalactic monsters, and try to save the different homeworlds and play different characters. But we'll probably just play through all of the content, play everything once, and then I'll probably sell the game off, because I have both legacy versions of Aeon's End, and I think I prefer the gameplay in those, with the way that the portals spin and trigger powers. And I just have a lot of content in that I'd like to get through, so I probably don't need both versions of the game. And, Astro Knights is fine. I'm going to rate it a 7.0. And I think if someone was just encountering that game, they could have a really good time with it. But I do think that it pales in comparison a little bit to Anne's End, especially when you figure in all of the kind of content and expansions and all the stuff in Anne's End. And since I have all of that, that seems to be the way that I should go. Also with Kristen, I played Fog of Love, which is sort of a relationship simulator. This has sort of been known to break couples to some degree. And I think when that happens, it's because couples are playing the game improperly and they're sort of speaking for themselves. But you're not supposed to be playing as yourself. You're supposed to be playing as a character based on the traits that you receive at the beginning of the game. So you'll have certain qualities, and those qualities will sort of determine your character. Now, the interesting thing is that I think I figured out how you're supposed to play Fog of Love. I think a lot of people want to play it as a role-playing game and just answer the questions, based on how their character would answer. However, there's a system of sort of set collection where you need to get certain kinds of tokens. And in order to do that and win the game, you can't really just answer based on how you think your character would answer. You really need to prioritize answering to score those tokens. But what I think people need to keep in mind is that they are role-playing by going for those tokens because they have drafted the cards that tell them that they need to get those tokens. So like if you're playing a cocky character like I was and you need to get tokens on 5 arrows, then pursuing that goal is true to the cocky character. It's going to lead you to make choices that are the cocky answers. There will also be cards that come up where you will be incentivized to answer something in the way that your opponent's, it's a collaborative game, so opponent isn't really the correct word, let's say partner. Your partner wants you to answer. For instance, if I'm giving my partner flowers, she's supposed to pick the sort of flowers that she would want. And I'm supposed to pick the flowers that she would want so that our scores will match. So for those kinds of questions, I think you really do want to sort of role play and answer the question honestly and try to make that match, which is what your character would be doing. So in certain instances, you will be 100% role playing because you're trying to get hearts, which builds up your stamina in the game and is a way to high end game scoring. But in the other way, in the other kind of cards where these kind of challenge cards, I think they're called, you really just want to heads down pursue certain colors, certain tokens. And I think if you do both of those things and kind of split yourself between letting your traits guide your choice making and answering true to those traits and role playing in that way, rather than just role playing as, stream of consciousness and how you think you should be answering the question. I think if you do that combined with when you're doing the hearts questions, answering truly and trying to make a match with your character, that is sort of the correct way to play the game and will lead you to winning as much as possible. So I actually really liked this game. I thought, once I wrapped my head around it and I understood the gameplay and I accepted the game for what it was, I had a really good time playing it. And it's something that comes with multiple scenarios, sort of like a Time Stories game, but not that involved, just different relationship scenarios. So you can play through these different scenarios, but also there are so many trait cards, literally I think hundreds of them. So you could play this game a lot, and you would get different combinations of trait cards, and every game would be different. I think when you look at it in that way and look at it as a simulation game, and if you have the understanding that I think I have in terms of how to play it and accept it on those terms, it can be a really kind of fun, lighter game in this simulation type of genre. I do think a lot of people are going to come into this game specifically with a lot of expectations, and Kristen definitely wanted it to be a different game than it was. So it kind of half fulfilled what she wanted, but she half wanted to be playing a different kind of game. So I think for her, she was kind of disappointed with the game and how it played. I will say that for me, based on my acceptance of the game and my experience with it, it's not a game that I would want to pull off the shelf all the time. And certainly you're only going to want to play it with certain players, because they wouldn't necessarily have to be romantic partners, but it would have to be someone that you're comfortable sort of role-playing being a romantic partner with to some degree. So it's not something I would play with just anyone, and it is, you have certain scenarios, and I think it'll be the most fun each time you play a new scenario for the first time. And there are expansions and things like that. There was a Kickstarter way back when, and I think if you went all in on that Kickstarter, you got loads of expansions. But since then, the game has been picked up by retailers like Target, and everything's kind of broken out. So you can now get the base game by itself, and you can get the various expansions lots of other places. So I think for me, I am going to, again, much like Astro Knights, rate this game a 7.0, with the caveat that I'm probably going to want to play it the most with Kristen, and if she is disinterested in playing it, I think she's going to give it another chance, and maybe we'll play through the scenarios in the base game. But if it's something that doesn't interest her that much, I'll probably just sell it off, because I think my opportunities to play it with other friends who would be interested in playing this kind of a game with me will be limited. But I really enjoyed it for what it was, and I'd like to play it a bunch more, leaning into the very kind of simple simulator-based gameplay that the game offers. I also had a heavy Euro game group come over on Sunday, and we played 2 games. We were actually planning on playing Toledum, which I think I mispronounced in my last video, but it's all about tiles, so it's either Toledum or some variation on that. We were planning on playing that, but there were some issues with one person being sick and not being able to make it, and that person was someone else's ride. So then I had to go and pick up the second person, and it reduced our game playing time. So one of the big games we got to, and I'll talk about that in just a moment when I get to it alphabetically, because I'm going in alphabetical order because I'm a big nerd. But the other game, because we didn't have time for Toledum, ended up being Grand Austria Hotel, which is a game that all of us have played before. We all like everyone who was there, and we knew we could get through it quickly with the shortened amount of time that we had. Now, I'll just say off the top here that I really love Grand Austria Hotel. I think it's a fantastic game. I'm going to score it a 9.0. And it's a hand management game to some degree, a card management game. Although you never really have that many cards in your hand, you're just kind of choosing what to draft and then putting it on the bottom of your player board. And you get various resources, food and drink that you need to serve to those cards who are your customers in a cafe. And then once you've satisfied them, you can book them into your hotel. There are a lot of other things that are happening in this game, including you need to prepare hotel rooms for them. There are these bonus cards, these staff cards that all work in different ways. Some of them are one-time uses. Some of them are just ongoing powers. Some of them are endgame scoring, and some of them you can use once per round, and then you'd kind of tap it like you might in Magic the Gathering. But you're going to do a draft at the beginning that will start you with 6 of these cards. And then every time you check a guest into a hotel room, they're going to have bonus powers that will activate. Sometimes it's for money, sometimes it's for food and drink, sometimes it's to get more guest cards, sometimes it's to open up more hotel rooms, and sometimes it's to draft more of these staff cards with the various powers. Most of the gameplay, though, is centered around a dice rolling and dice drafting mechanism where you'll have a certain number of dice based on player count. You'll roll it at the top of every round, and then you'll go in kind of a snake draft. So the first player will take 1 die, and then you'll go around, and when you get to the last player, after they take their die, they'll take a second turn with another die that they draft, and then it will go in reverse player order. So essentially, the first player of a round gets the first and last turns. And how this works is these dice will be rolled, and then they'll be placed in various categories. So if you get a 1, that's going to go in the food category. A 2 will go with the drinks. 3 will go with, I think 3 is preparing rooms. 4 allows you to either get money or go up this Emperor track that will activate at the end of the 3rd, 5th, and 7th rounds, which will score you some victory points. And then, depending on how far you are up it, will either give you a reward or make you pay a penalty. And then it kind of resets, and it's an ongoing track that you need to deal with throughout the whole game. The dice that have been rolled as 5s will allow you to play those staff cards with a money discount, and the 6s will allow you to take any actions from any of the other categories, but you have to pay a money to do that. And then, to make things a little more complicated, the strength of the action is based on how many dice of the type are there when you draft that die. So for instance, if there were 4 1s, which is food, and I got to the 1s first, and I took a 1 and put it on my little player order tile, I would get to take 4 food. There are kind of limitations on food and drink in terms of what you can get, because there's 2 kinds of foods and 2 kinds of drink, but you always need to take more of one kind than the other. So again, that's a limitation. And if you're trying to get the food or the drink that's on the lower end, it can be very difficult to get those kinds of food or drink. I think the ones that are hard to get are the cheesecakes and the wine, which would make sense. And the crullers and the coffee are more common. But there is a really good puzzle in this. Also, when you check your guests into the hotel room, you have to pay to prepare these hotel rooms. They get more expensive the higher up you go in the floors in the hotels. But the hotels are also subdivided into various sections of rooms. And every time you close off a section, depending on how big the section is and what color it is, you get to go up on that Emperor track, that track that I mentioned. You might get some money. And I forget what the 3rd thing is. I think it's just victory points. But there's a really good combination of mechanisms and a puzzle in this game. And it's not that complicated. I've probably even now made it seem more complicated because you don't have the game, you're not looking at the game and all these other things. But essentially every round you're just rolling dice, and then you're drafting 2 dice and you're taking actions based on those 2 dice. I think what that means in the end is that it's a game that you usually can teach to anyone, but within that there's a good amount of crunch to it. So it's not one of these games that has a lot of fiddly rules or a super high rules overhead. And if players are wanting, a game with more strategy and some crunch to it, but you want a game that you can teach fairly quickly or teach to almost anyone, this is a game that really fits that bill. And I think part of that is why I rate it so high and give it a 9.0, because it's just a game that you can get to the table with almost anyone. We also played Mosiac, A Story of Civilization, it's from Glenn Drover, who has worked on, I think, Railways of the World, but more recently he's put out Raccoon Tycoon and Lizard Wizard. And this is a civilization game that's based around 8 different actions. It's a lot of cards. So generally you're going to be purchasing cards with different resources. You've got different kinds of leaders. You can get different kinds of governments throughout the game. There's some area majority. There's a lot of building that's happening. There's some resource management. It's just a really good game. And one of my friends who's a heavy gamer and likes a lot of kind of heavy Euros said he thought it was the best Civilization he's ever played with us, and possibly the best Civilization game he's ever played. And I think that says a lot. And part of that is because it's sort of simple in what it does and how it does what it does. There are a lot of Civilization games that are very fiddly with a lot of rules and kind of all these rules exceptions, and you'll have situations where you have my 3 guys are attacking your 2 guys, and they hit you for 1 and you hit back, and then they come off the map, and there's combat, but the combat is kind of simplified. It feels like you're playing this like super old, 8-bit video game, but then you're doing this empire building as well. This game streamlines so much of that. There is not really combat in the game. There are some ways to remove units, but that's done more through card powers. Generally, what you're doing is you're building various kinds of cities and towns, and depending on your leader card, you may be putting out military units and moving them around. And then there are certain game triggers that happen 3 times throughout the game when certain cards come in certain decks. So they're mixed into certain decks. And whenever one of those cards comes up, you do an empire scoring, which has you do area majority in each of the regions. And I won't explain the area majority, but it's a little more complicated than, just a very simple area majority. And I think the complication of it, it's not that complicated, but I think the complication of it makes it unique, and it makes it work a little bit better than just kind of simple area majority. It gives you a couple of different ways to approach things. And there are other endgame triggers that can happen. There are 3 different tiles you can buy. Some of them will put these monuments out on the board, which have their own powers that they give to the players. Some of them people get once they collect a certain number of icons in the game. One of the things you'll be doing is collecting tech cards, and you'll have icons on those tech cards, and you'll be tracking all of the different icons. So anytime a player gets 6 of a certain color of icon, they can take the point scoring tile for that. And then there will be these other tiles that come out that are based on various circumstances, like having a certain number of armies, or doing a certain thing, or having a certain number of cards of a certain type. Just kind of random goals. And I think there are 16 of those in the game, and you'll be playing with 9. So there's some randomization there. And if at any point in the game, all of any 2 of those 3 types of tiles are all taken, that will also trigger the end game. It just felt like a really nice balance in our first game, and we all really enjoyed it. We're kind of interested to play it again sooner rather than later. The game did run pretty long, but that may have been because to some degree we were playing it as we were going. I think if you know what you're doing and you allow players to take turns almost on top of each other, because a lot of times what someone's doing won't really have bearing on the next player, so you could move through the turns fairly quickly if you wanted to. I think you could get through that game fairly quickly. Another Civilization game that's at the top of my list is the Imperium games, Imperium Classics and Imperium Legends, and there's a 3rd game in that series coming out later this year called Imperium Horizons. But that's a very different kind of civilization. I don't know if I'd call it a deck builder. I guess I would. It's definitely deck construction, but those are very, very card-based. You're just dealing with your own individual hands of cards and kind of what cards you're drafting. This is a little bit different. It's very based around cards as well, but there is a whole big map that you're building things on. So very different kinds of games, but I think those 2 games are probably my favorite 2 Civilization games. So for now, I'm going to score Mosiac an 8.5, but because it's my first play, I definitely feel like I will need to play it more times before I settle on a final score. The final game that I played was Stardew Valley, the board game, and that one I played with Kristen on my birthday. And it's a farming game. It's based on the video game. We just played the tutorial mode, which has players trying to fulfill certain goals, 4 different goals for your grandpa. But there are also these rooms, in most games, 6 rooms that you're trying to restore and rebuild. And we kind of backed ourselves into a corner where we didn't win the tutorial mode game, although we could have if we hadn't sort of explored different mechanics in the game that we didn't need to be dealing with, but we were just curious, so we kind of explored them and played with them a little bit as we were playing the game and didn't just focus on our goals. So I think if we were to go back and play the tutorial mode, we could win it, I think, fairly easily. Except that there are certain goals in the game that do involve a certain amount of randomness and can be hard to achieve. So if you get multiples of those in a game, it could make it hard to beat the game. I'm looking forward to playing the full game with, restoring the various community rooms as well. And I think once you throw those in, the game may get kind of difficult. So it will be interesting to see if once we're playing that version of the game, if Kristen still enjoys it as much. she generally likes to win the games most of the time. So I think if it's a game where, you know, you have to play it a bunch of times, and then, you know, you'll win every 7th game or something, it may end up not so much being a game for her. But we'll see. We'll find out. I'm really enjoying it. It's very simple mechanically once you know what you're doing. There are a bunch of different tasks that you can kind of do around the board every day. It's kind of like mini games, like little mini games that you're playing. So you do need to learn each little mini game to some degree, but once you do that, the game itself is fairly simple. And then it's just a case of sort of managing the tasks that you're doing and the resources that you might get doing this thing or that thing, and trying to fulfill the various goals and tasks and things like that. But I really enjoyed the game, and I think as a kind of farming themed cooperative game that we can play together, there's a lot of potential in it. It is just going to ultimately depend on if the game is really difficult or if it's easy breezy fun, at least during a majority of plays. But we'll find out. I think for me, though, I really like the game, and I'm going to give it a 7.5 for now. I'll definitely be back to amend that score once I've played it more. Thank you very much for joining me today for the Tuesday edition of the Crowdfunding Roundup. I'll be back tomorrow with a longer video looking at many more campaigns, because there are so many campaigns that launch on Tuesdays. Please don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this kind of content and want to see more of it. And until the next time, take care, play lots of great games, and I'll see you very soon.